The grand dining hall was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the faint rustle of expensive dresses and tailored suits. Chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, scattering light across the polished marble floors. Waiters moved gracefully between tables, carrying silver trays with delicate hors d'oeuvres and sparkling glasses of champagne. Among them, she moved too, balancing a tray with practiced ease. The waitstaff had learned to move silently, to anticipate the guests' needs before they even asked, and she was no exception. But tonight, her task felt heavier. She was not only serving drinks and appetizers, she was about to step into a world where appearances mattered more than talent, where laughter often hid judgment. Her eyes caught the glimmer of the grand piano at the corner of the room. It was a magnificent instrument, polished to a shine, its black surface reflecting the golden light from the chandeliers. She had played this piano before, but never in front of such an audience. The wealthy guests lounged in their chairs, sipping wine, chatting about politics, investments, and the latest gossip from high society. Their eyes were often critical, scanning everyone around them with a detached sense of superiority. They had no idea who she was. They only saw a waitress in a simple uniform, nothing more. As she walked closer to the piano, she felt their gazes linger on her. There was a soft murmur of laughter, almost imperceptible but deliberate. Some whispered to one another, pointing at her with delicate fingers, their smiles thin and slightly mocking. She kept her head high, hiding the flutter in her chest. She had encountered skepticism before, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just serving drinks. She was stepping into a spotlight she never asked for. A man with a tailored suit leaned back in his chair and laughed lightly. "Do you really think she can play?" he asked someone beside him, his tone carrying amusement, not cruelty. The woman next to him smirked, shaking her head. "I doubt it. Just look at her," she said, her voice carrying the soft elegance of entitlement. "She's a waitress. She shouldn't even be near that piano." The words stung, though she tried to ignore them. Her fingers itched, not from nerves, but from anticipation. Music had always been her refuge, a place where the noise of the world faded, where she could be herself without judgment. She had spent years learning in secret, practicing late at night when the house was silent, letting her passion guide her fingers across the keys. The piano had been her companion, her escape, her secret sanctuary. And now, it was waiting for her in front of an audience that didn't believe she belonged. The manager of the event, a tall man with a calm demeanor, noticed the laughter and the whispers. He approached her, his expression unreadable. "Would you like to play something for the guests?" he asked, as if it were a polite suggestion, though his eyes hinted at doubt. She nodded slightly, her heart racing. This was her chance, her moment to show that talent could not be measured by social status. She moved toward the piano, each step echoing softly against the marble floors. The guests turned their heads, curiosity mingling with amusement. Some leaned forward in their chairs, eager to see what would happen next. Their smiles still tinged with condescension. She reached the piano and sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. The polished surface reflected her face, focused and determined. She took a deep breath, letting it calm the flutter in her chest. She didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The music would do the talking. Around her, the room buzzed with quiet chatter, the sound of silverware against plates, and the soft footsteps of other waiters moving past. But when her fingers touched the keys, all of that began to fade. The notes started soft, almost tentative, like a whisper carried by the wind. At first, it seemed simple, unassuming, but there was a warmth in the sound, a depth that drew a few curious eyes toward her. A hush began to settle over the room. Some guests tilted their heads, intrigued despite themselves. The man who had laughed earlier furrowed his brow, his amusement slowly replaced by curiosity. The music flowed smoothly, each note deliberate and filled with feeling. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a storyteller, weaving emotions through her fingers, letting the piano speak the words she had never said out loud. Memories of late nights, quiet rooms, and tireless practice poured into every chord. The audience, who had assumed her presence was a joke, began to sense the truth hidden beneath her simple exterior. Her hands moved with precision, but her heart guided the music. She was not performing to impress. She was sharing a piece of herself, and that authenticity resonated in a way that no audience could resist. A few guests shifted in their seats, glancing at one another with a mixture of surprise and disbelief. They had expected something ordinary, perhaps even clumsy. Instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary unfold before them. She had the power to transform the atmosphere of the entire room. Simply by letting her music breathe, time seemed to slow. The chandeliers continued to sparkle. The silver trays continued to shine. But all that mattered was the music. Each note carried emotion, reaching into hearts that had grown used to superficiality. She felt the room responding, not with applause or verbal praise, but with attention, with stillness, with the quiet acknowledgement of something beautiful happening right in front of them. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a collective anticipation. Even those who had whispered and pointed moments before now sat silently, their eyes fixed on her, absorbing the unexpected talent that had entered their carefully curated evening. She didn't need to look at them. She could feel their shift in energy. The piano keys were her voice, and through them, she spoke with honesty and vulnerability. The wealthy guests, accustomed to being in control, to measuring value through wealth and appearances, were confronted with something that could not be quantified. They were seeing her, really seeing her, not as a waitress, not as a background presence, but as an artist. And in that realization, a quiet respect began to bloom, even if they did not yet understand it fully. As the first piece came to a gentle close, the room remained silent, the kind of silence that holds its breath in awe. No one clapped immediately. No one whispered. The music had created a space where judgment was impossible, where the barriers of class and expectation fell away. If only for a moment. She sat there for a heartbeat, letting the last note linger, feeling the pulse of the audience shift around her. This was just the beginning, but already, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by attention, curiosity, and a hint of reverence. In that moment, she realized that her journey had brought her here for a reason. Every quiet hour, every secret practice, every moment of doubt and perseverance had led to this instant of connection. The piano had always been her confidant, her companion, and now, it had become her bridge to the world she had once believed would never notice her. The wealthy guests had laughed, yes, but they had not yet cried. The true power of her music, the depth of her emotion, was still waiting to unfold, and she was ready. The gentle silence after her first few notes seemed almost sacred. Guests who had laughed moments ago were now leaning slightly forward in their chairs. Their curiosity piqued. They weren't sure what to expect, but the unexpected had already begun to make them uncomfortable in the best possible way. She looked down at the keys, feeling a calm clarity settle in her chest. This was no longer about proving anything to anyone. This was about letting the music tell its story. The manager watched from the side, his usual expression neutral, but his eyes betraying a hint of surprise. He had expected a polite but unremarkable performance, a small gesture to entertain the elite crowd while they sipped their expensive wine. Instead, he saw something more: a quiet confidence, a skill that demanded attention without demanding it. He caught the glance of a few guests who had initially whispered and laughed, and he saw their expressions change from amusement to something resembling disbelief. She started playing a simple melody again, soft and deliberate. It was a tune that seemed easy at first, but each note was layered with feeling. It was like telling a story without words, each key carrying a piece of her experience, her struggles, and her quiet triumphs. She remembered the late nights spent practicing while others slept, the small victories when she finally mastered a difficult chord, the comfort she found in music when the world outside felt cold and unwelcoming. All of that poured into the music now, reaching ears that had never expected it. A few guests exchanged looks, uncertain how to respond. One woman rested her hand over her mouth, trying to stifle a gasp as she realized that the sound coming from the piano was nothing like what she had anticipated. The soft laughter from before was gone, replaced by a tense curiosity. The audience, who had considered themselves connoisseurs of taste and refinement, now had to confront their own assumptions. They had underestimated her, and she was showing them exactly what that mistake had cost them. Her fingers moved effortlessly, though her heart still raced. Every note carried intention, every pause held meaning. She let the melody drift, sometimes lingering on a chord that pulled at emotions hidden deep within the listeners. She could feel the room's energy shifting. The wealthy guests, who had arrived with a sense of entitlement, were now quietly adjusting, their laughter replaced with something heavier reflection. They were listening not only to the music, but also to the story behind it, even if they didn't yet know the details. Her music created an intimacy that no opulent surroundings or expensive attire could imitate. Some of the guests shifted in their seats, uncomfortable in a way they hadn't anticipated. They had come expecting to be entertained in a shallow, superficial way. Instead, they were confronted with a quiet, powerful truth. Genuine talent and genuine emotion could not be bought or mocked. It existed here, in this unassuming woman who had been dismissed because of her uniform, her role, her appearance. Their laughter had been an attempt to assert superiority, but the music now quietly reminded them that superiority meant little in the face of authentic expression. She didn't rush. She let the melody breathe, allowing it to move naturally from soft and tentative to stronger and more confident. Each phrase carried a new emotion, a story she had not needed to tell before. Memories of times she had been ignored, underestimated, and dismissed surfaced in her playing, but she didn't dwell on them. Instead, she transformed them into beauty, into a language the audience could understand even without knowing her life. The music became a bridge between worlds, the elite, who had been laughing, and a humble woman whose talent had always existed. Quietly waiting for a moment like this, a young man sitting near the front, dressed in a sharp suit and holding a glass of wine, leaned slightly forward. His eyes were wide, a mixture of surprise and admiration. He had not expected to be touched so profoundly by the sound. The woman next to him, who had earlier whispered dismissive remarks, now sat back, her hands clasped over her chest as if to hold in a sudden wave of emotion. Some guests shifted awkwardly, glancing at each other, unsure how to respond to the depth they were witnessing. The room, previously filled with polite chatter and soft laughter, was now held in the quiet tension of shared recognition. Her music flowed, moving from one emotion to another, painting pictures in the minds of the listeners. She imagined each person hearing something different, something personal, something that spoke to their own hidden fears, joys, and regrets. The piano became more than an instrument. It became a storyteller, and she was merely the medium through which it spoke. The audience had no choice but to listen, to feel, to confront the humanity of the moment. The laughter had vanished, replaced by a silence that was richer than any applause. It was the silence of attention, of unexpected respect, of awe. The waitstaff moved quietly around the room, pausing occasionally to glance at her. They had seen her practice countless times, had heard the power of her music in the empty kitchen, in the back rooms of the restaurant, but now they saw her talent in a new light. She wasn't just a colleague, a friendly face bringing drinks to tables. She was an artist, commanding a space without words, creating something that reached far beyond the ordinary expectations of the evening. The wealthy guests, who had so quickly dismissed her presence, now began to experience a subtle internal shift. The man who had laughed first sat forward in his chair, his hands resting on the table. Almost unconsciously, he was listening with a quiet intensity, recognizing for the first time that life held surprises that no wealth or status could anticipate. They had all been laughing at her because it was easy, because it required no courage. Now, it was harder to laugh, because the music spoke to a part of them they often ignored. It reminded them of vulnerability, honesty, and beauty in unexpected places. She let the melody soften again, bringing the audience back into a gentle, reflective space. The notes seemed to linger in the air, wrapping around the chandeliers, the tables, the fine china, touching the hearts of everyone present. It was as if the room itself had changed, the atmosphere no longer defined by status or appearance, but by the connection created through something as simple and complex as music. Each note was a reminder that genuine talent, like genuine kindness or courage, could appear in the most unexpected places. For a moment, the world outside the dining hall did not exist. There were no discussions about wealth, no comparisons of social standing, no judgments based on appearances. There was only the sound of the piano, and the people, whether they realized it or not, were being transformed by it. Some eyes glistened with unspoken tears, some jaws tightened in awe, and some hearts quietly swelled with recognition of something they hadn't realized they needed. The raw, unfiltered power of authentic art. The manager, standing to the side, felt a rare sense of admiration. He had seen performers before, but none with the quiet authority that this woman exuded. She did not demand attention through flamboyance or theatrics. She commanded it through honesty, through skill, through a willingness to let herself be seen and heard. In that moment, he knew the evening would be remembered, not for the grandeur or the wealth displayed, but for the moment when a simple act of courage and talent reminded everyone that appearances could be deceiving, and true beauty could not be hidden. As she continued to play, a few guests began to relax into the experience, their initial skepticism replaced by a gentle engagement. They began to notice the subtle shifts in the melody, the way her fingers danced across the keys with precision and care, the emotional weight behind every chord. Even those who had come with the intention of mockery found themselves involuntarily drawn into the story she was telling. The music had taken control of the room, and in doing so, it had rewritten the expectations of those present. By the end of the piece, the room felt transformed. The wealthy guests had learned, without words, that talent could not be measured by appearance, that laughter could easily be misplaced, and that something as humble as a waitress could possess the power to move hearts in ways they had not imagined. And for her, the experience was more than a performance. It was a declaration, a quiet assertion that her gift existed and deserved recognition, no matter the judgments of others. The first step had been taken, and the evening was only just beginning. The music began to change. What had started as a simple melody now grew richer, fuller, as if it were taking on a life of its own. Her fingers moved faster, yet every note was clear and precise, filled with emotion. The audience, who had moments ago been curious and respectful, now leaned in, almost holding their breath. Each chord told a story, and every story felt personal, touching memories and emotions that had long been tucked away. The laughter that once echoed in the room was gone entirely, replaced by a quiet anticipation, a shared sense of being part of something extraordinary. Some of the guests' eyes began to glisten. They tried not to show it, to maintain the composure that they believed came with wealth and status, but they could not hide the effect the music had on them. It was gentle yet powerful, like a hand reaching into the heart and stirring emotions that had been ignored. She played without looking at the crowd, entirely absorbed in the music. Each note came from a place deep within, a reflection of her life, her struggles, her joys, and her quiet victories. She let the piano speak for her in a way words never could. A woman sitting at the far side of the room rested her hand over her mouth, unsure if she should laugh, cry, or simply sit in stunned silence. The melody reached her in a way that felt intimate, as though the music were speaking directly to her soul. She had come to the gala expecting to be entertained, perhaps with polite background music. Instead, she was confronted with something that felt far more important, more profound. It was as if the world outside had paused, and in that pause, the music created a space where nothing else mattered. The young man who had leaned forward in curiosity during the last piece now sat completely still, his hands folded in his lap. He had not anticipated being moved so deeply by a performance he had assumed would be trivial. Yet there it was, the undeniable presence of talent, of artistry, that refused to be ignored. The way her hands danced over the keys seemed effortless, yet each movement carried precision, skill, and intent. Every note seemed to speak, to carry emotion in a way that transcended the room. The wealth and the status of those present, the manager, who had been quietly observing from the side, felt a rare sense of awe. He had seen performances before, seen people play the piano, but he had never witnessed someone who could command attention without any theatrics, who could captivate without raising their voice or demanding applause. She was not playing for recognition. She was playing because she had to, because the music flowed through her naturally, carrying the truth of her experience and connecting it with anyone willing to listen. Even the guests who had been the most dismissive moments earlier found themselves drawn in. Their smiles of condescension were gone, replaced by an involuntary fascination. One man, who had leaned back in his chair to laugh at her, now sat upright, a serious expression on his face. He had not expected this. None of them had. The simplicity of her appearance had masked the depth of her talent, and now, the truth was undeniable. The music was more than entertainment, it was revelation. Her fingers never faltered, moving with a grace that seemed almost effortless. Yet each chord carried weight, a story, a whisper of the countless hours she had spent perfecting her craft. Late nights alone in a small, dimly lit room, practicing scales and pieces until her fingers ached. All of it culminated here, in this grand dining hall, in front of people who had underestimated her. And now they were paying attention, not just polite attention, but a deep, involuntary engagement that left them unable to look away. She allowed herself to smile slightly as she played, a quiet acknowledgement of the surprise in the room. She was not playing to shock or to prove anyone wrong, but it was undeniable that the reactions of the guests added an intensity to the performance. The room seemed to lean in with her, each person caught in the grip of the music's unfolding story. The piano became a storyteller, and she was the conduit, letting her emotions flow freely and allowing the audience to interpret them in their own way. Some guests began to wipe at their eyes subtly, unsure how to react. They were not accustomed to such raw expression in a setting filled with wealth and propriety. The music stripped away the layers of status and expectation. revealing a shared humanity beneath the surface. The woman who had earlier whispered dismissive remarks now sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the piano in quiet disbelief. She had expected a trivial performance, a polite diversion, but instead, she was confronted with artistry so profound that it demanded attention, demanded reflection. The melody shifted again, growing softer, more introspective. Her hands moved with delicacy, almost as if caressing the keys, creating a sound that felt intimate and vulnerable. The room, which had been filled with chatter and polite laughter earlier, was now completely absorbed in the music. Every guest was caught in the spell of the moment, unable to pull themselves away. The contrast between the lavish setting and the raw emotional power of the music created a tension that was impossible to ignore. A few guests whispered quietly to one another, their voices hushed in reverence. They tried to interpret what they were hearing, to place it within the context of their expectations, but the music defied such categorization. It was not just skill, it was emotion, history, passion, and presence combined into a single flowing experience. They could feel the dedication behind each note, the love and the struggle, the quiet triumphs and the moments of doubt that had led her to this moment. She continued to play, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, her eyes closed as she let the music guide her. It was no longer about the audience or their expectations. It was about the connection she felt with the instrument, the melody, and the space around her. Every chord, every pause, every delicate nuance was a conversation with the room, a silent dialogue that spoke louder than words ever could. The wealthy guests, who had believed their laughter would define the moment, were now participants in a story they had not anticipated, unable to resist the pull of authenticity and talent. The room itself seemed to hold its breath as the piece grew in intensity. The melodies intertwined, building layers of sound that resonated with everyone present. Hearts began to swell, emotions stirred, and the audience felt something they had long forgotten: the beauty of unfiltered, heartfelt expression. The performance was no longer a simple demonstration. It was a revelation, a moment of truth, and the room responded in kind, silently acknowledging the depth and power of the experience. She let the music soften again, bringing the audience back into a reflective, gentle space. The transition was seamless, as if she had the ability to control not just the piano, but the very atmosphere of the room. The guests who had been skeptical, who had come to mock or dismiss, were now quietly participating in an emotional journey they had not expected. The power of the music was undeniable, its influence pervasive, touching the hearts of everyone in the dining hall. As the final notes lingered, fading into the quiet hum of the chandeliers and the soft clinking of glasses, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. No one moved, no one whispered, as if acknowledging the weight of what had just occurred. The performance had transcended the boundaries of status, wealth, and expectation. It had become something far greater, a shared human experience, intimate and transformative. For her, the performance was more than a display of skill. It was an assertion of presence, a declaration that her talent, her passion, and her emotions could not be ignored. Every late night, every small sacrifice, every moment of self-doubt had led to this instant, a moment where the world had to pause and acknowledge what she had to offer. The wealthy guests, who had laughed, who had underestimated her, were now witnesses to something genuine and powerful. Unable to escape the truth of the music, she sat for a moment, hands resting lightly on the keys, feeling the energy of the room shift. The laughter was gone, replaced by a quiet awe and an unspoken respect. The performance had touched them, shaken them, and perhaps, in ways they did not yet understand, changed them. And in that moment, she realized that music was not just a talent, but a language, a force that could cross barriers, challenge assumptions, and connect people in ways that no words could. The journey of the night was far from over, but this moment, this unveiling of hidden brilliance, was already unforgettable. The music continued, but now it had taken on a new quality. It was no longer just a performance. It had become a bridge between her world and the world of those who had doubted her. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, subtle at first, then more obvious. Guests who had been sitting stiffly in their chairs were now leaning forward, their eyes softening, their expressions changing from polite curiosity to genuine engagement. Each note she played seemed to speak directly to them, not as a musician to an audience, but as a human being reaching out to others, telling a story they could feel but not always put into words. She had learned long ago that music had the power to connect people, to reveal truths that words often failed to express. Tonight, She was discovering how much more powerful the connection could be when the audience had expected nothing from her. Each chord, each delicate pause, carried with it her years of practice, her quiet determination, and her unspoken hope that someone, somewhere, might understand her through the language of the piano. Now, in this grand dining hall filled with wealth and expectation, she could see that understanding beginning to take root. A woman in a shimmering gown pressed a hand to her chest as tears welled in her eyes. She tried to hide them, afraid of appearing vulnerable. But the raw honesty of the music made it impossible. It was not the kind of performance meant to impress or entertain superficially. It was music that touched hearts, music that reminded the audience of their own humanity. The laughter that had welcomed her moments ago seemed distant and almost unreal. Here, in this moment, there was only the truth of the notes, the subtle rise and fall of the melody, and the emotional honesty of the woman seated at the piano. The young man who had once laughed at her earlier now sat perfectly still, his hands resting on the table, not moving, not speaking. He could not have anticipated the effect of what he was hearing. It was as though the piano held a mirror to his soul, reflecting emotions he often ignored. The performance demanded no reaction beyond attention, but it elicited so much more. It stirred memories, long-forgotten feelings, and a deep awareness of the beauty and fragility of life. The music was not just filling the room, it was filling them, touching the parts of themselves they rarely acknowledged. She continued to play, allowing the melody to flow naturally. The notes moved from soft and reflective to powerful and sweeping, each one carefully placed, each one imbued with intention. She did not need to see the audience to know their reactions. She could feel them in the energy of the room, the shifting expressions, the subtle movements, the quiet inhalations. All of it told her that her music was reaching them, breaking down walls that had seemed insurmountable. The manager watched silently, his usual composed demeanor replaced with a quiet awe. He had organized countless events, seen countless performances, but nothing had ever held his attention like this. She had not performed for recognition or accolades. She had not sought to impress with speed or complexity. Instead, she played with authenticity, letting the music reflect her emotions and her story. The result was undeniable. A room full of people, initially dismissive and skeptical, now wholly absorbed and deeply moved. Even those who had been the most critical, who had whispered and smiled in derision, were not immune to the music's power. Their skepticism had been replaced with attention, their laughter replaced with reflection. Some glanced at each other, unsure how to react, feeling emotions they could not quite name. They had underestimated her. But now, the truth was inescapable. The performance revealed not just talent, but also courage, dedication, and the quiet resilience that comes from years of unseen effort. She let the music breathe, pausing occasionally to let a note linger, to let silence carry meaning. Each pause was deliberate, a punctuation in the emotional story she was telling. The guests, initially expecting background entertainment, now found themselves fully present, engaged in a shared experience that transcended wealth, social status, and expectation. The room, once filled with polite chatter, was now a space of silent contemplation. Every listener caught in the grip of the unfolding melody. Her hands moved with a fluidity that seemed effortless, but every movement carried intention. She had spent countless hours perfecting her craft, not for recognition, but for the love of the music itself. And in this moment, that love became palpable, resonating through the piano, into the room, and into the hearts of everyone present. The wealthy guests, who had laughed, who had doubted, were now participants in a shared human experience, one that demanded empathy, attention, and vulnerability. The piano sang beneath her fingers, shifting seamlessly from gentle, reflective passages to moments of intensity and grandeur. The contrast heightened the emotional journey, taking the audience on a ride they had not anticipated. Some closed their eyes, allowing the music to wash over them, while others remained wide-eyed, captivated by the skill and passion evident in every note. The melody was not just heard, it was felt, a visceral experience that touched the soul in ways words could not. A few guests whispered softly to one another, though the sound was almost swallowed by the piano's resonance. They spoke of surprise, of awe, of disbelief at the depth of feeling in the music. They could not deny it. They had underestimated her, and she had shown them something they had not expected, that talent could not be measured by appearance, that artistry could come from the most humble places, and that emotional truth could not be faked or bought. She felt a quiet satisfaction as she played, not from the reactions of the audience, but from the simple act of expressing herself fully and honestly. Every note, every chord, was an extension of her own story, her own journey. She did not need their approval to validate her talent, but she could feel the room's energy responding, a silent acknowledgement of what was being shared. It was a rare and beautiful connection, one that transcended status, wealth, and expectation. As the piece reached its crescendo, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Every guest, regardless of their initial skepticism, was caught in the spell of the music. The power of genuine artistry was undeniable, its effect immediate and profound. She played with all the skill and passion she had cultivated over the years, letting the final notes linger, carrying the weight of emotion and experience into the quiet air. The effect was transformative, a moment that would be remembered long after the evening ended. When the last note faded, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. No one moved, no one spoke, as if acknowledging the depth of what had just occurred. The performance had not just entertained, it had connected, challenged, and revealed. The wealthy guests, who had once laughed, were now left with a quiet respect, a recognition of talent, courage, and humanity that could not be dismissed. The room had been transformed, the atmosphere irreversibly altered by a performance that was as much about connection as it was about music. She sat back for a moment, letting her hands rest lightly on the keys. The silence was not awkward or empty. It was filled with the lingering presence of what had been shared. She could feel it in the subtle shifts in posture, the softened expressions, the gentle inhalations of breath. Her music had reached them. She had not sought to impress, but to express, and the result was a profound, undeniable impact. The laughter was gone, replaced by attention, reflection, and a quiet admiration that no one could ignore. The manager stepped closer, eyes wide with unspoken amazement. He had anticipated polite applause, maybe a few compliments, but he had not expected the emotional transformation that had taken place. He could see it in the faces of the guests, in the stillness of the room, in the way the music had woven a story that touched everyone present. She had revealed not just talent, but truth, courage, and the unyielding beauty of authentic expression. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone that sometimes the most unexpected people hold the greatest gifts, waiting for the right moment to shine. The final piece began softly, almost like a whisper, drawing the room back into a quiet anticipation. The wealthy guests, who had been moved by her previous performance, now leaned in, unsure what to expect. The piano seemed to breathe under her fingers, each note carrying a weight of emotion that resonated through the hall. She played not for praise, not for recognition, but because the music demanded to be expressed. Because her heart and soul flowed naturally through her hands, the melody unfolded slowly, deliberately, weaving a story of hope, struggle, and triumph. It was a reflection of her journeyers of practice in quiet rooms, the long nights of dedication, and the moments when she had doubted herself. Now, all of that found its voice, reaching into the hearts of the audience. The room was silent, every eye on her, every ear attuned to the music. It was not merely a performance. It was a revelation, a reminder of the power of authenticity and perseverance. A few guests could no longer hold back their emotions. Tears glistened in their eyes, some brushing them away in quiet dignity, others allowing themselves to be moved fully. The woman who had once whispered dismissive remarks now sat with her hands pressed to her chest, overwhelmed by the beauty and honesty of the music. The young man who had laughed at her earlier was now utterly still, his focus entirely on the story unfolding through the piano. They were experiencing a truth that transcended wealth, status, and expectation. She continued, letting the music rise and fall like waves. The gentle notes gave way to moments of intensity, each crescendo carrying the force of her determination and passion. She felt every note, every chord, as if the piano were an extension of her own emotions. The audience, captivated, felt the music as well. It was intimate, personal, and yet shared by everyone present. The barriers of social class, of judgment, of preconceptions, had dissolved in the face of such raw expression. A subtle shift occurred in the room. Conversation stopped, movement slowed, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The wealthy guests, who had laughed, who had judged, who had dismissed her presence, now faced a reality they had not anticipated. Talent, true talent, could not be ignored. Authenticity, passion, and dedication could not be measured by appearance or social standing. The music reminded them of something fundamental, that human experience, emotion, and beauty were universal, and that they could not be confined by the superficial measures of society. She played with a gentle confidence, her body moving slightly with the rhythm, her eyes sometimes closing to feel the music more deeply. Each note was intentional, each pause deliberate. She was telling a story not only of her life, but of the universal human experience of hope, struggle, resilience, and the triumph of spirit. The guests, absorbed, could feel it in a way that transcended explanation. The room was transformed, no longer a formal gathering of the elite, but a shared space of emotion, connection, and reflection. The manager watched in awe, realizing that this was a moment few could ever forget. He had organized countless events, seen numerous performances, but he had never witnessed the raw, undeniable impact of such authentic expression. The audience had been lulled into expectations of politeness, of superficial enjoyment, and yet here they were, fully engaged, touched, and transformed. She had reminded them of a truth that they had often overlooked, that art, passion, and dedication cannot be bought, mocked, or measured by status alone. The music shifted, becoming softer, more reflective. The melody told a quieter story now, one of introspection and subtle triumph. The audience felt the weight of every note, the emotion embedded within each chord. Some whispered softly to one another, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. Others simply sat, eyes wide, hearts stirred, absorbing the depth of what they were witnessing. The performance was no longer just about her skill. It was about connection, vulnerability, and the profound effect of honest expression. Her hands moved with precision and grace, each finger a conduit for her story. The notes floated, swelled, and dipped, creating a rhythm that felt alive, almost breathing. She did not look at the audience, yet she could sense their presence, their reactions, their growing admiration. She did not play to impress. She played to communicate, to share a part of herself, and in doing so, she was touching every person in the room in a way that transcended words. A few guests shifted in their seats, unable to resist the pull of the music. The wealthy woman in the shimmering gown was quietly weeping, overcome by the honesty of the performance. The man who had been skeptical was leaning forward, utterly captivated, a mixture of respect and astonishment in his expression. The room had become a place of shared experience, where emotion, talent, and courage were recognized and valued above all else. The laughter, the whispers, the judgment from earlier had vanished, replaced by a collective understanding of what it meant to be present, to feel, and to witness true artistry. She allowed the music to reach its final crescendo, a moment of intensity and release that filled the room with a sense of awe. The notes lingered, resonating through the hall, echoing in the minds and hearts of everyone present. The performance had reached its peak, not in technical skill alone, but in the depth of emotion conveyed. It was a culmination of her journey, a statement of her talent, and a reminder of the power of perseverance and authenticity. When the final note faded, the room was silent for a moment longer than expected. No one moved, no one whispered. The air was thick with the weight of shared emotion and realization. The wealthy guests, who had laughed, who had doubted, were now fully aware of the depth of her talent and the courage it had taken to share it. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that could not be forgotten or dismissed. It was a moment of collective recognition, of understanding that greatness often comes from unexpected places. Slowly, the silence was broken by soft applause, tentative at first, then growing in intensity. The guests stood, some wiping away tears, others simply clapping with reverence. The room had transformed from a space of casual expectation to one of heartfelt appreciation. She had taken a risk, stepped into a spotlight she had not sought, and had delivered a performance that left an indelible mark on everyone present. She stood from the piano, bowing slightly, her face serene and proud, though not boastful. The applause continued, but she felt no need for it. The true reward was the connection she had created, the emotions she had stirred, and the walls she had broken down in a room that had once doubted her. She returned to her duties, carrying herself with quiet confidence, knowing that she had not only shared her talent, but had also reminded everyone present of the universal power of authenticity, dedication, and courage. The gala continued around her, but something had changed. The wealthy guests were no longer merely observers. They were participants in a shared human experience, reminded that greatness cannot be measured by appearance or status. And she, the waitress who had been underestimated, had revealed her brilliance, leaving an impression that would linger long after the final notes of her performance had faded. In that moment, she understood the true power of music. It could move hearts, change perspectives, and remind people of the beauty of human expression. She had played, and through her music, she had touched the lives of everyone in the room.